Lily lay on the hospital bed, her small body barely moving under the thin white sheets. Suddenly, her eyes flew open wide, filled with fear. "No, don't come near me," she screamed, pulling the tube out of her arm. "Lily, it's me, your dad," James said, stepping closer with his hands held up to calm her. "Stay away," she cried, grabbing a plastic cup and throwing it at him. The cup fell to the floor, spilling water everywhere. "Please, no more," she sobbed, knocking over a tray of medical supplies. Her small hands trembled as she fell to her knees. "Don't hit me. Don't hurt me," she begged. James froze, his chest tight with sadness. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how. His heart ached as he thought about the happier times. The sun was setting, and Lily laughed as she ran through the yard, her brown hair flying behind her. She was racing her friend Claire to the fence. James leaned back on the porch, smiling as he watched his daughter play. "I don't know how she still has so much energy after today," James said, putting his beer on the railing. Claire stopped running, laughing as she leaned against the white fence. "She's 7, James. I think kids keep their energy in bottles and sell it to us as coffee," she joked. Their house was small but cozy, standing proudly at the end of the quiet street. The shutters were freshly painted, glowing in the golden sunset. The smell of cut grass filled the air. It was their new start, a peaceful escape from the busy city. Inside, Lily's room was a colorful mess. Posters covered the walls, and she had a little stage where her stuffed animals were her audience. That afternoon, she had performed songs for her parents. James clapped along, pretending to cheer. Claire clapped too, and the house was filled with laughter. "Do you think we'll like it here?" Claire asked as they watched Lily hop along the garden stones. James smiled, holding her hand. "I think we already do." Monday came, bringing its usual rush. James left early for work, his tie crooked as he grabbed his truck keys. Claire washed the dishes from dinner, humming to herself. Lily sat on the couch, eating cereal and watching cartoons. "All right, Pumpkin, shoes on," Claire called, packing Lily's lunchbox. "You don't want to be late for your first day of school." Lily groaned, but did as she was told, tying her sneakers in messy bows. Soon, she joined a group of kids walking down the street. Claire waved as Lily disappeared with them. When James came home that evening, the smell of garlic and butter greeted him. Claire was cooking while Lily talked about her first day at school. "She made friends already," Claire said with a wink. "That's my girl," James said, ruffling Lily's hair as she giggled and ducked away. Life in the new house settled into a rhythm. Weekends were spent hiking, having barbecues, and exploring nearby creeks. Lily's laughter echoed through the house and yard, filling their days with joy. But over time, small cracks began to show. James's job kept him away late, leaving Claire lonely in the evenings. Lily, however, thrived. She played with friends, drew pictures in chalk on the driveway, and came home bursting with stories. But sometimes Claire noticed something. A shadow of sadness flickered in Lily's eyes. "You okay, sweetie?" Claire asked one night, brushing her hand over Lily's hair. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine," Lily said quickly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. One Saturday, Lily asked if she could go to her friend Lily's house down the street. "Be back before dinner," Claire said, handing her a granola bar. "And checking if you go anywhere else." "I will," Lily called as she ran out the door. By the time the sun had set, Lily still hadn't come home. Claire stood at the kitchen window, worry growing in her chest. She called Lily's mom, who said Lily had left hours ago. James came in, tired from work. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Lily's not home," Claire said, her voice shaking. "She hasn't been at Lily's for hours." "She probably got distracted," James said, grabbing his coat. "I'll check the park." Claire grabbed her coat too. They searched the park and nearby streets, calling Lily's name, but she was nowhere to be found. The police came, asking questions about what Lily had been wearing and where she was last seen. Neighbors joined the search, walking through woods and shining flashlights. The house felt empty and heavy. Days passed, and there was still no sign of Lily. James started watching their neighbor, Mr. Carter. The man acted strange, keeping to himself. One night, James saw Carter dragging something heavy in his backyard. It looked like a box locked with chains. James's heart pounded. Could it be connected to Lily? He decided he couldn't wait any longer. Grabbing a crowbar and flashlight, he crept into Carter's yard late at night. The box loomed in the shadows, its rusty chains glinting faintly in the moonlight. James's hands shook as he got closer. He took a deep breath, gripping the crowbar tighter. She has to be here. James sat quietly, counting the seconds, waiting for any sign of movement inside. But there was nothing. He took a deep breath and moved forward. The grass felt wet under his knees as he got closer to the box. Up close, it looked old and worn out. The red paint had faded, and there were thick chains wrapped around it, held by a rusty padlock. Just looking at it made his stomach hurt. James reached out carefully, running his hand along the rough surface. It was cold and splintered in some places. His fingers shook as he got closer, trying to see through the little gaps in the wood. But all he saw was darkness. Then, James felt something next to the box. It was a small bundle wrapped in plastic. He froze, his heart racing. Slowly, he pulled it closer and unwrapped it. Inside was an album. His hands shook as he opened it. The first photo was of a picnic table, blurry but harmless. But the next one made his throat tighten. It was a picture of Lily when she was little, maybe 5 or 6, smiling with a balloon in her hand. It was a picture from a family outing. James remembered it well. The zoo, the ice cream, and how Lily laughed when a monkey threw peanuts at the glass. But this wasn't from his album. He'd never seen this picture before. He turned the page. There was another photo of Lily, sitting on a swing in their backyard. Then another of her walking to school with her pink backpack. The pictures kept getting more recent, each one making James feel worse. Someone had been watching her, taking pictures of her. James covered his mouth to stop himself from gasping. His body felt filled with anger and fear, but he made himself keep going. The last photo was the worst. Lily wasn't smiling anymore. She was sitting on a bed in a room he didn't recognize. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. James slammed the album shut, shaking all over. His teeth clenched, but he forced himself to stay quiet. Then, he heard a door creak open, and James froze. He turned slowly. Carter was coming out of his back porch, moving carefully. The moonlight barely lit him up, but James could see he was holding a flashlight, shining it across the yard. James hid behind the box, holding his breath. The flashlight beam moved closer, just inches from James's foot. He stayed still, tense and quiet, until Carter stopped. The man muttered something, but James couldn't make it out. After what felt like forever, Carter turned and went back inside. James waited, making sure the door had closed before he moved. Back in his garage, James sat down on an old stool. He was still shaking. The album was on the table in front of him. It felt heavy. Slowly, he opened it again, looking carefully at every photo. His fingers hovered over the last picture, the one of Lily in that strange room. He stared at the background, trying to see something that could tell him where it was. But there was nothing. "James, what are you doing out here?" Claire's voice made him jump. He quickly closed the album and hid it under a pile of papers. "Nothing," he said, his voice strained. "Nothing," Claire repeated, looking at him closely. She stepped closer, her eyes on his hands and the tension in his shoulders. "What's going on?" "Nothing you need to worry about," James said, sharper than he meant to. Claire flinched, but didn't argue. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said quietly and walked away. James waited until he was sure she was gone, then pulled the album back out. He had to figure out what Carter was hiding. He couldn't wait any longer. That afternoon, James watched from his yard. Carter came out onto his back porch with a black trash bag over his shoulder. James's heart raced when he saw where Carter was heading. The box wasn't visible from this angle, but James knew it was there, behind the shed. Carter dropped the bag and started rummaging through the clutter in the yard. Then something fell out of the bag with a soft thud. James squinted. It was a doll. It had a pink, worn-out dress, and one of its arms was twisted. James's heart raced. Carter froze for a second and looked around, like he knew someone was watching. James ducked lower, holding his breath. Carter quickly grabbed the doll and shoved it back into the bag, moving fast. Then he disappeared into the shed. James rushed back inside. He wrote in his notebook, "Doll, pink dress, dropped, looked scared." His mind raced. Carter had acted so strange when he saw the doll. He was hiding something, and it wasn't good. That night, James sat by the living room window, notebook open on his lap. He watched Carter's house. It was quiet, but James knew better than to relax. Carter's strange behavior had been bothering him for days. Around midnight, James heard movement. He leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Carter came out again, this time with a metal toolbox. James grabbed his flashlight and quietly stepped outside, staying in the shadows. He followed Carter's footsteps to the shed. Carter set the toolbox down and started pulling out tools, including a drill. The noise was loud and sharp, but James stayed hidden, wondering what Carter was up to. The next morning, Claire came down the stairs and looked at James. "Did you even go to bed?" she asked, setting down a mug of coffee. "I couldn't sleep," James muttered, tired and tense. Claire looked at him carefully. "Is this about Carter again?" James nodded. "Something's not right with him." "I know it." Claire sighed. "Please don't do anything stupid. Let the police handle it." "The police aren't doing anything," James snapped. "They've got nothing." Claire didn't say anything else. She just gave him a worried look and walked away. Later that day, James watched Carter cleaning up his yard. He was acting more frantic than usual. He covered something with a tarp and tied it down. James wrote in his notebook, "Why clean now? Hiding something." That night, James couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed a crowbar and moved quietly across his yard toward Carter's house. Everything was dark and still. He pushed open the back door, which was slightly open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled bad. James turned on his flashlight and walked down the hall. At the end, he saw the basement door slightly open, light spilling from the crack. He hesitated for a moment, but then he thought about Lily, her pale face in those photos. He couldn't stop now. James moved closer, his heart pounding. He crept down the stairs, the air growing colder. The light at the bottom grew brighter. When he reached the bottom, he stopped. The room wasn't just a basement. It was much worse. The walls were lined with shelves full of jars, tools, and things James didn't want to look at. In the center was a heavy metal door, half open, leading into another room. James moved closer, shining the flashlight inside. What he saw made his stomach turn. There were cages on the walls, small and filthy. Inside, there were kids huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. The air was thick with a horrible smell. James's eyes searched the room, calling out, "Lily?" His voice was shaky. One of the kids moved. It was Lily. She crawled to the bars of the cage. She looked thin, her hair tangled, her face pale. But James knew it was her. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak. James rushed to her cage, trying to calm himself. "I'm here, Lily. I'm getting you out." But she didn't respond. She stared past him like she wasn't even there. James's heart broke. These kids weren't just scared, they were broken. He promised, "It's okay. You're safe now." He managed to unlock Lily's cage. She fell into his arms, limp and cold. He hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face. But then he heard a door upstairs slam. Lily flinched and buried her face in his chest. "Stay here," James whispered. He set her down carefully and said to the other kids, "I'll be back. Stay quiet." He picked up his crowbar and moved toward the stairs. Carter appeared at the bottom of the stairs, holding his own crowbar. His eyes were dark. "You don't belong here," he growled. The two men clashed, tumbling to the ground. James's rage gave him strength as they fought. With one final push, James wrapped the chains around Carter, determined to stop him once and for all. Carter's wrists were tied tight until he stopped struggling. The fight with Carter was hard, but James was so angry it gave him strength. Every punch he threw was because of the pictures in his mind of Lily's sad eyes, the bruises on her skin, and the cries of other children. When it was over, Carter was on the ground, tied up, his face all bloody, his chest breathing fast. "You're never going to hurt anyone again," James growled, his voice full of anger. The hospital lights above flickered, shining on Claire as she walked down the hallway. She was out of breath, scared, and holding her purse tightly. "Where is she? Where's Lily?" Claire asked, her voice shaky, grabbing a nurse. The nurse pointed toward Lily's room. "She's stable, Mom," the nurse said kindly. Claire barely heard her. The words didn't make her feel better. She kept walking until she found Lily's room. When she saw her daughter, Claire froze. Lily was lying still on the hospital bed, looking pale. There were bruises on her arms and neck, purple and yellow, and bandages on her wrists. They showed she had been tied up. Claire whispered her name, tears falling from her eyes. Lily. She sat beside her daughter, not sure where to touch her without hurting her. She brushed Lily's tangled hair away from her face. "I'm so sorry," Claire cried. "I should have protected you. I should have been there." She couldn't say more and put her face in her hands, sobbing. James stood in the doorway. His clothes were torn, and his hands were covered in blood. Claire gasped when she saw him. "Oh my God, James," she whispered. "What happened to you?" James looked at Lily, then at Claire. "It's not mine," he said quietly. "It's his." At first, Claire didn't understand, but then she did. Her knees gave out, and James caught her. "I had to," James said, his voice breaking. "You don't know what he did to her, to those kids." Claire hugged him, her tears soaking into his shirt. "This isn't your fault," she said. "You saved her. You saved her." But even though she said that, she still couldn't stop thinking about Lily's sad eyes and small, fragile body. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the blood on James's shirt. "You need to get checked." "I'm fine," James said, his voice sharp. Then he softened. "I'm fine, Claire." But Claire could see how tired he was, how broken he looked. "You've lost weight," he said suddenly, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You've been worrying too much, haven't you?" Claire laughed a little through her tears. "What do you think, James? Our daughter was gone, and I couldn't do anything. I've been useless." "Don't say that," James said, his voice firm but full of fear. "You're not useless, Claire. You're the reason Lily is going to get through this." Claire shook her head, still crying. "She's so quiet," she said. "She hasn't said a word. What if she never comes back to us?" James swallowed hard, trying to say something comforting, even though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "She will," he said. "It's just going to take time." Hours passed. Nurses came and checked on Lily. Claire stayed by her side, holding her hand, whispering to her. James sat in the corner, exhausted, thinking about everything he had seen. Carter's lifeless eyes haunted him. A detective walked into the room. "We've confirmed that Carter was responsible for taking at least 7 children over the past 10 years, he said. "Lily and the others are lucky you found them when you did." James didn't say anything. He just looked at Lily, her chest rising and falling slowly. It didn't feel like luck. Claire finally fell asleep next to Lily, her head resting on the bed. James draped a blanket over her and sat in a chair, looking at the 2 people he loved most in the world. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was heavy with everything they had gone through. James reached out and held Claire's hand. She stirred a little, but didn't wake up. "We're going to get through this," James whispered, though he didn't feel sure. They had to. The first few days at home were harder than they thought. Lily wouldn't talk. She stayed in her room, afraid to leave. Whenever James went near her, she would curl up and look scared. "Good morning, sweetheart," James would say softly, holding her favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberries. Lily wouldn't look at him. She would tense up, breathing fast. Sometimes, she'd run to her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit like a shield. "She doesn't mean it," Claire said one morning, noticing how James looked hurt. "I know," James said, but his heart ached. Lily seemed afraid of him, and it hurt him deeply. One day, Lily screamed, "No, don't hurt me." James's heart broke into pieces. Claire sat next to him. They both cried, watching Lily from the door. "She's afraid of me," James said quietly. "She doesn't know the difference between me and him." "She's afraid of him," Claire corrected softly. But even the words didn't feel right. "Therapy is helping," Claire said. "She'll get better." Slowly, Lily started talking more in therapy. She spoke about the basement, the smell, and the sound of Carter's footsteps. But when it came to what he did to her, she refused to say anything. Claire sat in the waiting room, her heart aching, imagining what Lily might be saying. James paced, feeling guilty. "She doesn't even want me in her world," he said. "She's healing," Claire said. "But she's healing without me." One day, James was in the garage, looking at some old toys. He found a dusty box with a mascot costume of Sunny the Sunflower, Lily's favorite character. He put it on, the costume heavy and awkward. But if this would help Lily, he would do it. The next morning, Lily was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV. She didn't hear James coming, not until she saw Sunny the sunflower in the doorway. Lily's eyes widened, but she didn't run. Instead, she tilted her head, curious. "Hi there, Lily," James said, his voice muffled in the costume. James danced awkwardly, trying to make Lily laugh. He heard a small giggle. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. Over the next few days, Sunny the sunflower came to visit Lily every day. They played games, colored pictures, and even had tea parties. James sweated in the costume, but each time Lily smiled, it was worth it. One afternoon, Lily stopped pouring imaginary tea. She asked softly, "Sunny, why do you do this every day?" James hesitated. "Because I want you to be happy," he said. Lily looked at him for a moment, then slowly reached for the sunflower head. She pulled it off. "Daddy," she whispered. Tears filled James's eyes as he looked at her. "Yes, baby, it's me." Lily hugged him tightly. "I knew it was you all along," she said. James cried, holding her close. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Lily pulled back and looked at him. "Don't be sorry," she said, her voice steady, even though there were tears in her eyes. "You saved me." James's heart filled with hope for the first time in a long time. Claire stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes, but smiling. The sunlight came in through the window as James held Lily, promising silently that he would never let her go. The next morning, the Newton family sat at the breakfast table. It wasn't anything special, just scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. But the room was filled with laughter. Lily smiled as she talked about a school project she had done. "We're making sunflowers," she said, her voice bright. "Miss Ella said mine looked like it was dancing." James laughed. "A dancing sunflower? Huh? I'd like to see that." Claire tucked a strand of Lily's hair behind her ear, her smile soft. For the first time in a long time, her face didn't look tired. The Newtons had changed. They decided they couldn't go back to the way things were. James stepped back from his job. He spent more time at home, playing with Lily and reading books. Claire started sharing her thoughts with James. They became closer. They made dinner together and spent time talking after. Lily was healing slowly. She still had some fears, but she was getting better. James joined a local group to help prevent child abductions, sharing Lily's story and what he had learned. Lily returned to school, made new friends, and joined the art club. One day, James watched Lily play with the other kids. "She's going to be okay," he said, his voice full of emotion. Claire smiled. "We all are." The Newtons planned their first family vacation in years. They were going to the mountains to hike and relax. Lily picked the place, excited to see pictures of cabins in the trees. The night before the trip, Claire asked, "Do you think we're ready for this?" James smiled and wrapped his arms around her. "I think we deserve it." The morning of the trip, Lily held her stuffed rabbit and looked out the window excited. As they drove away, James glanced in the rearview mirror, watching his family. For the first time in a long time, James felt peace. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but they were strong, together. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring, and heartwarming stories and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.